In today's show, I am talking to Sayantan Ghosh, Assistant Professor of Sociology at the Hiralal Mazumdar Memorial College for Women. He is affiliated with West Bengal State University. He is currently involved in research in the Department of Sociology at Jadavpur University in Kolkata. Explores the sociology of smell, the study of smell and society, literature and society, Indian social thinkers, philosophy of Rabindranath Tagore, study of religion and society. He is a passionate researcher of the sense of smell, hoping for a better future, or, as he likes to say, a more fragrant future of humanity. He believes that we, as human beings, depend much more on our senses than we think, particularly on our sense of smell, as we judge and make decisions based on smell. It is not so much about knowing aspects of the external world as it is about knowing one's own self. In our discussion, we touch on many important aspects such as logic and sensations in Western versus Indian traditions, smell and language, smell and its connection to structural inequalities and urban planning, as well as sense impressions as they contribute to perception in people with sensory impairment. We conclude hoping for a multi-sensory future, addressing ways, including technological ones, to bring more awareness to our senses, especially to the sense of smell. Here is the show. Hi, Sayantan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ruxana, for having me in your show.
So you are in Kolkata, India, right?
Yeah, I'm from India. Yeah, Kolkata.
Yes, it must be early evening there. It's early morning here in the US at the time we are recording this episode, and I am having my coffee here. It's Turkish coffee. I like to drink Turkish coffee in the morning in a small cup, European style, with cardamom and cinnamon.
Okay, I just finished my evening tea. Yeah.
Oh, you too? Yeah. So mine is yours, I assume. It's very aromatic and delicious. What kind of tea did you have?
Well, I usually do have Darjeeling tea. It's famous for its flavors and fragrances. So I prefer that Darjeeling tea.
So it's amazing that the internet works so well, right? And we are very, very far away from each other, and yet talking as if we are face to face. Yet the internet doesn't really allow, at least not at this point, to really smell, in your case, my coffee, and me, your tea. So who knows, maybe sometime in the future, we will be able to do this as well.
Well, that will be great. If we can smell people or things abroad, that will be a huge revolution in the olfactory area. Well said, Roxana.
And a huge revolution in terms of technology, right? So who knows, maybe Web 3.0 would be able to bring all these senses, revive the senses for us. So the sense of smell, this is the topic of today's episode. And this is actually a very, very interesting sense, treated unfairly by many cultures. So the Western philosophy has endorsed the antagonism between reason and emotion, a separation between logic and intellect on one side and emotion, feeling, and sensation on the other. Plato, in fact, used to describe emotion and reason as two horses pulling us in opposite directions. This has created a hierarchy of the senses, with sight being associated with intellect, as I said, and hence placed at the top of the hierarchy, and smell being associated with emotion, thus less important, was downgraded at the bottom of the hierarchy. Now, I know from your work, that Indian traditions like Vyasa, Kalidasa, sorry if I don't pronounce them correctly, emphasized multisensuality, although later, with the colonial rule, the Western model was adopted or imposed. Could you please say a few words about these traditions?
Yeah, I will try. First of all, thank you for the question. It's a very interesting question you have asked. And it's very much a philosophical question, or if I may say, a worldview. What you have said is very much true, that Western tradition has emphasized on sort of two ideas, as Plato, Aristotle, later Hegel in the hierarchy of the senses. But see, there is an inherent ambivalence Why I'm saying that? Because on one hand, they are saying that logic, intellect are in one side, whereas emotions, senses are in the other side. And in the next idea which comes is the sense of sight is for logic and intellect. Now, two things can't be true together, right? If you are saying that senses and intellect are sort of in opposition, then sight, which is also a sense, cannot be linked with intellect, right? So there is an ambivalence within this idea itself. And it's a very interesting ambivalence because even in René Descartes, if I pronounce it rightly, what he has said, I will call away all my senses. I will close my eyes, I will shut my ears, and I will call away all my senses. While in another, I think in his diabolic or some other text, he was mentioning about using the telescope and the power of the telescope. So Anthony Synott rightly puts it that perhaps Descartes wanted to call away all his senses, but with his scientist's hat on his head, he used the telescope. So this is one thing. Secondly, we must remember that Western tradition, it's a huge tradition, and there are multiple dimensions. Just like there is Hegel, Descartes, or much earlier Plato, Aristotle, we also have point of views of Hume, Hobbes, who emphasized on senses, and sort of they have a view that nothing could be in the intellect, which was primarily or at first not in the senses. And Karl Marx very interestingly emphasized on senses, particularly in respect of alienation of workers. For Marx, perhaps sensory deprivation is alienation, or at least it is one of the key areas where alienation is being felt. And a person, in this case a worker or a wage laborer, can return to his humane life when he or she can feel his sensory feelings. Nevertheless, you rightly mentioned the dominant trend is that of the binary between senses and intellect, or emotions and logic. Now I will come to India. Again, there are multiple traditions, and since India is a huge country, so it's very difficult to point out that this is the Indian tradition. Rather, there are traditions and there are variations across time and space, as each region may have a distinct perspective. Nevertheless, if I talk about some of the trends in ancient India, I will give you some examples. Their multisensuality was encouraged. For example, as you rightly mentioned and pronounced, Vyasa and Kalidasa. In Kalidasa's Shakuntala, its Sanskrit name is Abhigyan Shakuntalam. In the first act of the play, what we can see is the picture of a Tapovana. Tapovana is like a forest, which is a sort of a reserve forest, and where the animals and birds can move freely. No one will harm them. It's sort of a hermitage. And the picture depicts of various trees, fragrant flowers, birds chirping, and sort of a very interesting multi-sensory landscape and smellscape as well. In this context comes King Dushmanta, and we know through the sound of rapid pace of his chariot and the horses. This rapid pace and the sound of his horses' hoof is not just an action in the play, but it also represents two civilizations. It breaks the peace of the Tapovana. During the end of the play, we will again come back to the Tapovana as audiences, and there again remain peace. And it's sort of a transcendental unity between Shakuntala and Dushmanta. This is one example. In Ritu Sanghara of Kalidasa, he depicts a multi-sensory picture, sort of prescribes that, or rather depicts that it's a moonlit night, the lake is full of fragrant flowers, a sweet-smelling breeze is blowing, the touch of the grasses and the flowers are very smooth. And this could be a very significant, or can provide a perfect context for intimacy. Now, I will give you an example from, say, the Mahabharata. In Mahabharata, the Pandavas, they suffered of a conspiracy which was conducted against them, and they were roaming in the forest. when they were in disguise, the pact was if their opponent party could break their disguise, then they will again have to go to the forest for 12 years. So when in disguise, they visited a king's palace, and their guru Dhauma was training them before that how to behave in a king's palace. He told the eldest Pandava, Yudhishthir, not to break wind in front of the king, what we call nowadays the far taboo. This is a small training given to a rather future courtier. Another one is, it's very significant if you know that there is an idea of rebirth in Hinduism. There is a strand within Hindu philosophy which believe in rebirth or punarjanma. In the Shanti Parva of the Mahabharata, the last section of the Mahabharata, Bhishma give an excellent example or rather analogy through smell. He said, just like the sesame and the mustard does not lose their own smell, that is to say their identity, if they are caressed by few fragrant flowers. But gradually, if many flowers, fragrant flowers, are brought together with sesame or mustard seed, and they are caressed by those fragrant flowers multiple times, then they gradually lose their smell, that is to say, their identity. Bhishma used this analogy to refer to the idea of rebirth. He said, just like the sesame or the mustard, human beings will also take multiple rebirths until and unless they have finished their work and they have finished their desire. Once they have finished their work in this earth, and once they don't have any desire, then they will not be reborn. Finally, in Kumar Sambhavam of Kalidasa is an excellent depiction of the great union of one of the supreme gods and goddesses, that is to say, Shiva and Durga, or the Param Purusha and Prakriti. Kalidasa depicts the entire landscape with spring. It is spring, and there are multiple trees with fragrant flowers. Parvati, the great goddess, her makeup is full of fragrant flowers. Her lips are so fragrant that a honeybee got attracted towards her lips. And she was trying to remove it with the lotus in her hand, which is also fragrant. She was so laden with fragrant flowers, garlands, and so on and so forth, that Kalidasa used the analogy of a branch of a tree which is full of flowers. Just like a branch of a tree or a creeper which is full of bloomed flowers, so that the branch could not be seen and it moves in a light air. Similarly, Parvati, it seems that she was looking like a branch of a tree or a creeper full of fragrant flowers and just moving in the air. Her body was moving. Such was the depiction of Kalidasa of the great union between, in one opinion at least, the ultimate god and goddess. Not only in literature, but also in non-fiction writings like the Kama Sutram by Malanaga Vatsayana, a very famous text, as you might have heard. The text is about the Kama, which may be translated as love, desire, and intimacy or sensuality. This thick and detailed description about how to prepare an intimate meeting, what flowers are to be used, how to decorate your bed, how to make your bed with flowers. There's a strict prescriptions and proscriptions for women and men, what to do and what not to do. For example, there's one prescription suggests that remove the dirt within your teeth, remove sweat, and then go for intimacy. Well, another prescription suggests how and what kind of trees or saplings to be used in what part of your house. Actually, there are 64 kalas or art forms which are to be taught or learned. This is called the 64 kalas or art forms. One of the kalas or art form is Gandha Yukti. Gandha means smell. Gandha Yukti is how to be fragrant or what to do or what not to do. And in the Gandha Yukti section, as far as I know, according to one opinion, there are more than 1 lakh slokas or methods how to remove bad smell, quote unquote, and how to be fragmentized. So such is the thickness, as far as I know, in the Indian tradition and the role of multisensuality. This even continued in the medieval age, although slightly differently. And if you see the medieval art forms, the pictures, you will see Nurjahan, the queen of Jahangir, Badshah, in the Mughal era, medieval age, around late 16th and early 17th century, or rather 17th century, early 17th century, that she is standing with a rose in her hand. Rose sort of symbolizes the Mughal era, and the Mughal era is famous for its ittars, a perfumed element, ittars, and the Mughal garden and the rose garden. It is true that in the colonial period, particularly the period after Enlightenment, Indian culture and tradition was sort of suffered in this, and there were trends of monosensuality, that is the sight, or bisensuality, that is sight and sound, as the colonial rulers emphasized, and a sense of masculinity was, I would say, constructed masculinity was suggested. Modern masculinity sort of suggested that this sensuality or using perfumes, it's sort of a feminine quality. Although ancient kings used perfumes, ittars, they were jewelry, but modern man, particularly the Western mind, suggested and upheld the emphasis on sight and sound. That is why Indian culture in the 18th and 19th century suffered in this regard. And the Babu culture, the elite persons, the rich men who used to roam with wearing perfumes and garlands were criticized. Nevertheless, very recently, I think after 90s, there is a trend of olfactory revolution, so to speak. And the number of male perfumes are increasing day by day.
Yes, very interesting. So such a rich tradition and so many changes, right, when shifting to the colonial rule. Very, very interesting. In your research, you also talk about what you call the Indrias as the gate of knowledge. Could you develop a little bit more on this? What are these Indrias?
Well, Indrias can be translated as senses. I think that we receive whatever experience or knowledge through our senses, mainly, right? Well, the number of senses can be debated, but for now, if we consider 5 senses, with definitely, I acknowledge the position of the 6th, we receive experiences and knowledge through our senses, or Indriyas. So Indriyas, for me, are the gateway of knowledge. As I was mentioning earlier, I think Hobbes, Hume, Locke, they emphasized that nothing could be regarded as intellect, which was primarily not in the senses. So senses are the gateway of knowledge. We see, we taste, we listen, we smell, we touch, and through these we know and acquire our experiences. And it is very interesting that not only the human beings, I will give you an example of a ritual that the Yagyas were performed, the bhoga, the offering of food to the gods. And it is believed that the Yagya, which emitted a huge smoke, the Yagyas, ghee, myrrh, incense, sandal paste, a lot of fragrant materials are being used. So it is believed that the gods and goddesses who are situated above in the heaven, they receive our offering through the smoke, through the fragrant smoke of the Yagyas. They also receive our offered food items through the smell of the food. So you see, it's not only about the human beings, it is sometimes believed that the gods and goddesses also receive our offerings through their sense of smell.
Very interesting. So thus they have to be important, not only sight and hearing to be connected to knowledge, to cognition, but also the other senses that, at least in the Western tradition, were not considered on a par with the others. Let's move now to the topic of smell and language. Many languages like English have a rather rich vocabulary for colors and geometric shapes, but few words, in fact, for smell. What about other languages? Do they have a similar distribution of vocabulary terms?
Well, as far as I know, in the few languages, Smell is a very difficult sense to express. I mean, you can receive a smell, but it's difficult for us, you and I, to explain or express our feeling. Say we say smell of coffee, smell of tea, or smell of rose, but to someone who don't know the smell of coffee, how would you explain to that person? We can serve him her a coffee and then they will understand, but in all cases you can't do that, right? So we often say that it smells like coffee. So it is very substance which you are mentioning, but the smell of coffee doesn't have a word for itself. Or we can say sweet smelling. Sweet is an adjective also used in taste, right? Or we can say the smell is beautiful. That is borrowed from sight. So there are very few adjectives to express our sense of smell. So as you mentioned in English, for say good smell, we have the words like aroma, fragrant, scented, and so on. For bad smell, sort of foul, stink, stench, and so on. If we talk about Bangla or Bengali language, the word gandho or gandha means smell. And to denote good smell or bad smell, often a prefix is used, like sugandha means good smell. Su means good, or durgandha means bad smell. This you will find in Hindi as well. So this is one sense. But the word gandha has many connotations. In the first sense, it means smell. In the second sense of the word, it says that quality of our substance which is received through our nose. That is also similar to the word smell. While in the third sense, it's much more interesting that the word gandha is used sense of anticipation. For example, like as we say in English, they have got the smell of victory, or they smell danger, or I smell a mystery. In this sense, the word gandho is used in Bengali, like rahoshyer gandho, that means smell of mystery. I smell some foul play, right? As Hamlet explained, this is used in this sense as well, as an anticipation of something, like danger or victory. In the fourth sense, the word gandha is used to portray an absence of something, a lack of something. For example, if person say in Bengali, okhane tar kono naam gandho nei, that means there is no trace of him or her here. Perhaps you have come to search someone and you cannot find him or her, or a particular animal, a particular object, particular food, whatever. You will say there is no trace of him, right? Similarly, for this, the word smell or gandho is used in Bengali. You see, you can take it very, very literally as well, as I think you will agree that each person has a distinct smell. And if a person was present in the room, it is probable that we might know from his or her smell, even after she or he has left the room. So it can be very interesting, both in the literary sense and a symbolic sense as well. In the fifth sense, or rather, I will just digress a bit. There is air, or air is named as gandho boho. Gandho means smell, and boho means the carrier. So a name of air is gandho boho, or the smell carrier. It's not an adjective, but the name itself. So gandha baha means air, because as we know, air carries smell. So if the air is sort of flowing over a fragrant garden, we receive the air, we will receive the fragrance. Similarly, if the air is flowing above drainage system or a high drain, then we will receive the foul smell. That makes smell far more interesting and sort of indispensable, because in order to breathe, in order to live, we must breathe. And if we breathe, we will smell. This connection of smell with breathing, air and breathing, makes it indispensable and ubiquitous.
Absolutely. So many connections, which at some point somehow are not captured in English. You mentioned ancient texts and how important the senses have been in ancient times and in the past in general. And not only each sense in particular, but their combination. How about the senses in everyday life today, in our occupations, the way we move around, what we eat, in our intimate moments? How do we interact with different smellscapes in daily life, and how are these shaped by culture? For example, we know that the Indian culture is very, very rich in its spices, its food, incenses in temples, and so on. How do we interact with this in today's world?
Mm-hmm. I will mention one by one. You mentioned food, occupation, and intimacy. And yeah, there are definitely many areas to talk about in everyday life. But if we start with food, there's a saying in Sanskrit and as well as in Bengali and some other North Indian languages, Ghanena Ardha Bhojanam. It means to smell a food is to half eat it. So if we smell a food, it seems that the eating process is half done.
Oh, I so much agree with that.
Yeah. So, in fact, I asked this question in my research to my interviewees that what substances can you identify before or without seeing through your smell? Almost all of them talked about food items. Say rice is boiling in the kitchen, or sort of a fry is going on. It's a fish or meat. Some people are more accurate in identifying what is being cooked in the kitchen. At times, people do identify what is being cooked in their neighbor's kitchen because often the smell flow. And it also gives you an idea about your neighbor's identity, where they belong from, and so on and so forth. Interestingly, there were few cases what you can call the politics of smell. A recent report suggests that a food of Vietnam, I think its name is durin, it was banned in Malaysia, Singapore, and some other countries because of its smell. Some people say that it smelled like rotten flesh, dirt. It is a delicacy in Vietnam, but some people of other countries, they don't like it, and this has been banned to carry in public transport. You cannot carry it in public transport.
Is this durian?
Yeah, durian.
It's okay. Yeah, I tasted it once in Singapore. Yeah, it has a very interesting taste. It does smell indeed. If you don't pay too much attention to the smell, the taste is actually very rich, and I think it keeps you full for a long time. I do think Singapore doesn't really allow it in public transportation.
Yeah, the politics of a smell, I can say, because this is another case which happened in Delhi, in India. A person from the northeastern part of India was cooking, and neighbors objected because they were cooking with a particular spice which is being used after fermentation, and they could not accept that, and the issue rose. Lady or the landlords were saying, you don't cook those substances like the smelly things, but that's a delicacy in their own culture. In Bengal, there is a particular area called Chattogram, which is now in Bangladesh, eastern part of Bangladesh. Chandgaon, or in English, they pronounce it as Chittagong. They used to have dried fish. It's their delicacy. But the other parts of Bengal or some parts of India, they cannot stand the smell. And as you mentioned, after cooking it, I heard that it tastes nice. But when the process is on, it can be difficult for persons who don't belong in that culture. Food can be a very interesting area, food and smell, of discussion.
Yeah, I remember, even though this doesn't have anything to do with the famous Dracula, Romanians really like to eat garlic a lot. Okay. And they eat it in all sorts of forms, from very well cooked to very raw. And garlic is such an important ingredient in Romanian cuisine. But not everybody understands that, especially outside the country. So here in the US, garlic, for example, is preferred most of the time cooked, very well cooked. So as part of or combined with so many other ingredients, and just in small quantities. So yeah, that's very interesting. If one wants to eat raw garlic, yeah, you have to really isolate yourself somehow. Different cultures have their own spices, some more fragrant than others, and they are not received well all the time by other cultures. We have to adapt.
Yeah, actually, you see, food, it is a very interesting area for identity and identity politics as well, because people often tend to judge, particularly the minorities in a particular country. Say it might be a bit controversial, but in India, I see people judging, say, Muslims because of this garlic issue. they use garlic in their food, and they eat garlic. And often the persons who sort of have an aversion towards Muslims, they used to identify them as garlic smelling or strong smelling. And this is sort of an area through which they have been marginalized. That because there's a smell of garlic, they are Muslims and they should be avoided. And that is very, obviously that is very sad, but that is also a very interesting case study particularly in say our areas, how a person or a group is marginalized. And in this case, the gustatory and the olfactory areas are become sort of the areas to marginalize other people.
Smell is arguably the most visceral, immediately experienced, and often unconsciously perceived, yet significantly devalued and misunderstood. Smell has exposed many social aspects of life, including social class, gender, age, biases, and racial stereotypes. And I know that you have focused on this on your research as well, in particular studying a concept called unsmellables. What does this mean, and how does it relate to structural inequalities?
Yeah, this is a very interesting question to me, because I'm trying to deal with this for some time now. You see, in respect to your earlier question as well regarding occupation, each occupation has a social status, and we sort of build a hierarchy. That is an occupational hierarchy. My argument is that as each object has a particular smell, people who are working with it often gets absorbed with that smell. For example, the fishmonger or a fish seller or the persons who cut fish, with their smell. Often the spice sellers also can be smelled. During an informal chat with the spice seller I was having, she said that we don't know, but people who come closer to us say that we receive the smells of spice from you. So my question is, the occupational hierarchy and the olfactory hierarchy perhaps goes hand in hand. And just as particular occupation has particular social position in particular society, similarly, a particular olfaction has a particular social and moral connotation. And this can result in structural inequality, or this can be the backbone of structural inequality. For example, I will just flip the argument and say in this way, persons who deal with ghee, mead, incense, fragrant flowers, sandalwood, and all things which are fragrant, they are the Brahmins. They are generally situated at the top of the Varna or the caste hierarchy in India. Well, the Varna system is a system of stratification started in ancient India, and nowadays it's still going on, but it's much more complicated now because it's mixed with caste, mixed with class, status, and so on and so forth. But generally, it is perceived that there are 4 Varnas: Brahmins, who used to worship God and used to study. They are the sort of linked with knowledge. Kshatriyas, who are the warriors, kings, they are used for defense. Vaishyas, who are the businessmen, the traders, merchants, and some of them are also involved in agriculture. And the Shudras, who were the serving class, who used to serve these above mentioned three groups in the hierarchy. There is also another group who were regarded as auspicious or untouchables. They are, say, the domes who used to perform the duties in the crematorium, the toilet cleaners, the mathors, and the persons to clean the streets, the toilets, and so on and so forth. They are regarded as untouchables. This is the hierarchy. Now, view it from this angle, from the olfactory angle. As I mentioned, persons who deal with ghee, mead, incense, fragrant flowers, they are at the top of the hierarchy. They're the Brahmins. And they are believed as the worshippers of God. Suppose that God speaks with them or speaks through their mouth, like, say, the bishops or the priests in the West. In contrast, persons who have to deal with dead bodies of animals, human beings, dirt, toilets, they are at the bottom of the hierarchy. They are the untouchables. It was so strict at certain times that if a Brahmin by mistake stepped on the shadow of an untouchable, he has to bathe. The untouchables were not allowed to come in the same road when a Brahmin is traveling, because they're considered as impure. The very word untouchable, you understand, is very much derogatory, but it was the practice, and it still is in some areas. Now, my argument is these persons were regarded not only as untouchables, but they were and still are regarded as unsmellables, because certain sayings hold that. I will give you a quote from Manu Sanghita, which says that making a Brahmin cry, smelling liquor or substances which should not be smelled, cheating, sexual intercourse with a man, these are regarded as sins. These must be avoided. If committed, there will be a downward social mobility in the caste hierarchy. So, smelling liquor or substances which should not be smelled is put in equal footing with cheating or harming a Brahmin. Such was the importance of smell. This is the case of caste, you see. In case of class also, you will find both in the West and in the East that there are statements like, quote unquote, the lower class smell, as George Orwell puts it. He also remarked that I don't blame the working man because he stinks, but stink he does. In a study conducted by Brill, people remarked that they dislike the smell of sweat most, not because of its sour smell, but because the sweaty smell is associated with the working class. So, while in contrast, you will see that the kings, the aristocrats, and so on and so forth, they're always portrayed in literature as fragrant. Their food are aromatic. They live in a sort of fragrant ambience, as if they're always fragrant. So this is a sort of a class issue. And it doesn't end here, because there is also an aspect of social mobility linked with it. I'll give an example. In Mahabharata, Satyavati was a daughter of a fisherman community. She was named as Matsya as she smelled of fish. It is not unnatural because she was associated with fishing, but later she met with a great sage called Parasara. Meeting and mating with Parasara, they had a child, and afterwards Satyavati became pregnant, and then she was married to King Shantanu. Later, her fragrance became a legend. She was named Yajanagandha, someone whose fragrance travels miles. Yajan means mile, Gandha means smell. So Yajanagandha is not Satyavati's adjective to sort of describe her, but Yajanagandha becomes her identity. This transition from Matsagandha to Yajanagandha is also sort of upward social mobility in the caste or class hierarchy. River stories are also present as one of the reasons why the family of Rabindranath Tagore was downgraded as a Pirali Bamun, that is a lower status within the Brahmins. One of the speculations hold that one of Rabindranath's ancestors smelled beef by mistake. And beef was a substance which became proscribed later in Hinduism. In earlier stages, it was not proscribed in Hinduism, but later it became proscribed. The person was not only not allowed to eat or smell beef, but because the person smelled beef by mistake, so the entire family was downgraded into a lower strata. Such is the power, say, of smell and inequality.
So this in a way connects smell and its perception in society to urban planning. So we also have to talk here about olfactory planning. How is this actually done?
That is another very interesting question, because as I mentioned about the unsmellables, the people who are regarded as lower in the hierarchy in terms of say caste or class, they were regarded often as unsmellables. Upper castes and upper classes are not ready to smell them. For example, each profession, each object has a particular smell. And the persons who are working with it often received or sort of they get engulfed within that smell. You will see in the planning of ancient cities and so on and so forth that often certain people or communities are forced outside the city walls, say the toilet cleaners, the persons who to perform the crematorium rituals, the domes, or the leather workers. They used to get situated, or rather they're forced in the corner of the city, either outside the city wall or at a fair distance from the royal palaces, the houses of the aristocrats. Because the people, the objects which they work, with which they work, their profession, all these were regarded as unsmellables. In modern cities, we can also see, I will give an example, say of Kolkata. In earlier times, there was a hospital for the patients of tuberculosis. It was situated at the corner of the city, outside the main city. And there was a Mathur Bosti, the slum of toilet cleaners, who were located at the farthest corner. And they were not allowed to come in close contact. And it sort of became such engrossed in their consciousness as well, as when other people of upper and middle classes used to pass, they themselves used to maintain a distance as well. So it sort of came from both ways. As the city expanded, the slum, the toilet cleaners, were further shifted in the farther corners. Similarly, the leather factories of Kolkata were again shifted due to the expansion of the city, as the leather factory and the workers associated to it were shifted in further away. And the crematorium or the burial grounds were also and still are situated either outside the city or in the corner of the city, because the smell of the cremation ground, no one is eager to receive that either, and no one is eager to come even close contact to the domes of the cremation ground. Thus, the urban planning became, in a way, an olfactory planning as well.
Similar initiatives of urban planning have taken place in cities around the world, but of course, each has its own culture, its own way of dealing with it. Let's move now to a topic that I'm very much interested in. What happens when we consider all the senses, which we know by now do not work in isolation, but they are in very tight contact to each other? What happens to the senses when one is disturbed or even missing? For example, the sense of smell or the sight. How do the other sense impressions contribute to perception in people who have been affected this way?
Very interesting question. You see, there is a increasing debate, and I exactly don't know the answer, but there's a debate regarding this. Some people say that the blind persons have a better ability to smell, and their other sensory organs perform better than the sighted persons. While other argument holds that no, we have the ability to smell or to taste or to sort of think more through our noses, if I can put it in this way. But the fact that we emphasize so much on vision and to some extent on hearing, that we don't give importance to our other senses, and we don't depend on our other senses. If we start depending on other senses as well, we can enjoy a multisensory life. Nevertheless, I have talked with many persons with visual disability or impairment, particularly blind persons. And the difference which I find that in case of the sighted persons, sometimes it's like the answer is like that, yes, yeah, it might have a smell. Yeah, it has a smell. But for the blind person, it's, yes, I know it's him or it's her. They're so sure in their answers that I sort of knew that they use their sense of smell pretty much. It sort of helps them virtually in every area of their everyday life, along with other senses like hearing. I'll give you a few examples, starting from searching food, what is being served in the plate in front of them. I mentioned this in the Uncommon Senses 3, you were there as well.
Yes, I really liked your presentation there. I was really fascinated by the story that you told at that time, where one person with a visual impairment was visiting the house of a friend, I think, and he was offered rice, and he was very much able to really sense that the rice was not cooked properly or it was too old. Something like that. Would you like to tell that story again? As much as you remember it, of course.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, and I asked actually 3 questions regarding the condition of food. Can you identify the condition of food via smell? One question was whether it's fresh or rotten, whether it's burnt, or whether it's perfectly boiled or not. Three questions. Smell of freshness is identified by both blind and sighted persons. Rottenness can also be identified by both. Burnt smell is definitely very strong, so people identify. But the smell of boiling is very subtle. But the blind persons did identify whether the food is perfectly boiled or not through its smell. And a person could also differentiate between rice cooked today and rice cooked yesterday through its smell. And another case was a person who was staying in the hostel, in the university hostel. He was served with, I think, meat that day. When he was about to eat, he received a smell and immediately put it aside because he smelled blood. And he knew that the chicken or mutton which was served was not properly cleaned. So he couldn't have it. But other persons didn't identify properly. So it starts from a very basic need to eat. And in other areas as well, for example, in road security, a blind student was going for his new tuition, and as he was moving, he suddenly stopped because he smelled danger. He retreated for a while, and he stopped only when he could no longer receive that smell. Basically, it was a smell of dirt mixed with water, and there was an open hydrant. If he would have moved few steps further, he would have basically gone into that hydrant. Similarly, to give you another example, that they do identify persons and things very accurately through its smell. A student told me that when he returned home from his hostel, he went to his room and he got a new smell. So he inquired to his mother that what is new in my room, and she said that it was basically a surprise present for him. It was a bag for him, but he immediately smelled it. In case of persons, also they do identify when a person is approaching from a distance that who is coming if the person is known to him, and as the smell intensifies, they know that the person is very close to them. And finally, I will give you this example that sounded very interesting to me as well during my research. As a blind person said that the smell of ink and the smell of books are very close to my heart. Because the smell of books, these books brought me to this university and to such distance. I didn't know in my school days or in my early days I could come so far. And there was an instance where about the writers or amanuenses who should write on behalf of the blind persons. So what happens is a blind person generally dictates, and the writer or the amanuensis, he or she writes. So a person gave the exam, and when the results come out, he saw that he received 0 in each and every exam. He was confident and he challenged in the court. And when the copies were brought into the court, to his utter dismay, he discovered that all the copies were blank. He was told that all the copies were blank or some scribbles were made on them. The writer got his payment and basically fled away. And so such is the importance of smell. And my next comment will be very significant in this, because a person commented, a blind student, that I love the smell of ink. When the pen of the writer is going on the copy, I know my answer is in full flow. And when the smell of ink intensifies, I know that my answer has struck the right note. It gives them a sense of security as well.
These are really amazing examples to really show that for people who, with a good sense of sight and hearing, how the other senses like smell are most of the time suppressed. And by suppressed, I mean not really in focus. We don't pay too much attention to them. And this is unfortunate because, as you said earlier in our discussion, all of them contribute to our experiencing of the world and to knowledge, to cognition. And I wonder if there is a way, I ask this mostly from the technological point of view, but also in terms of how we as society can do this, to try to bring more awareness to these quote unquote lower senses, the sense of smell and taste, but in particular smell. If there is a way we can boost this so we can be more aware of our sense of smell in daily life.
Yeah, that's a very, very interesting question about the future. But just to add on the last point, we were mentioning the comment that the dependency on sight and sound. if you have ever been in a forest, and if you talk with the local forest folk, the local people, you will see that their sense of smell and sense of hearing are greater than us, the city dwellers. Perhaps because they depend much more on their nose, on their ears, because in a dense forest, your eyes can help you little, particularly during night or dark. Your hearing, your sense of smell can help you. And since I have been into a few forests, I like visit the jungles, you will experience all of your senses, and you will see that the local folk, their sense of smell and sense of hearing are very strong. They are not blind persons, but they depend on their sense of hearing and smell. And to answer your question, technology, I know you're the person of technology. This is perhaps one of my weakest points, but I think you know about the experience in Japan, in the company called Shimizu, I think. They sort of used smell or fragrance to enhance the work efficiency of their employees. What they did, that first of all, they identify the hours when the employees' energy levels are low or they are making more mistakes, particularly in jobs which are repetitive, say punching cards or punching keys. And so they identified few hours of the day, and they used to pump or sort of release a fragrance, different types of fragrances through a system of centralized pipeline in the entire office. And they found that within a few days, or within a month or so, the number of mistakes were reduced considerably, particularly in jobs which are repetitive. So technology definitely can be used in a very significant way. And I would rather suggest, or I would rather hope for a planning of a fragrant city, or rather, I will say a multi-sensory city, which will help not only the blind person, but all of us. Say, we nowadays hear about green cities or green buildings. It's a very excellent state for any government or any country around the world. But if we can add the ideas of fragrant cities, or say cities which are pleasing to the ears, not just horns and so on. Say in Kolkata, there is a culture in the last few years. They use music. They use music in the signal. When the signal is red and you cannot move as a pedestrian, there's a music going on. And even if you can't see, you will know that since the music is on, the cars are moving. So I won't be able to come down from the footpath. Since the music has stopped, now I can move. Or perhaps it's the other way around. Anyway, and if we can build a fragrant city, say we can have a smell mapping of the entire city. And if we can upload the map in the internet, or for the city dwellers, they will know through the smell much earlier that they have reached to a particular destination which they want. It will be, I think, helpful for a stranger who is new in the city, and for the blind persons as well. Say in my university, there are different departments, different buildings. So how can one know if a person, a blind person or a stranger, new? So see, if we can plant different types of fragrant trees, flowers, fragrant flowers, trees with fragrant flowers, and each building can be named with that tree. So through the smell, person can know that that building has arrived. Or definitely one can use, as I mentioned, the Japanese experience. It will help to identify the building, identify the department, and also it might increase the work efficiency of the workers, of the employees, so to speak.
I really like that. I think it's going to be a trade-off at some point in the future between more of the digital sensors to really guide someone to the right building on the campus, and another one to enhance the human sense of smell, right? So guide the human through her own smell, instead of just using sensors that will vibrate, let's say, on your watch to tell you, or even GPS, right, to tell you if you should turn left or right. I would prefer the second approach, but I look forward to those times the senses will be given more attention that they are given right now. Unfortunately, we are at the end of our discussion here. How can our audience learn more about you and your research, and how can you be reached?
Well, first of all, I hope they can learn a bit through Ruxana and her excellent channel, Creative Technology. And I wish its further growth in the future. I will do whatever in my capacity to help my friend sitting in USA, in the other part of the world. So thank you for that, my invitation. And I think we can carry it further, because it's an exchange of knowledge is very important for the future as well. And what you said in the last part regarding the technology, I really appreciate that step regarding GPS and moving and so on and so forth. Actually, I just mentioned 2 lines and finish that. As I interviewed many of my respondents, almost each of them said after the interview, I myself did not know that I depend on my sense of smell so much. Depending upon smell is also a process of knowing your own self-awareness, so to speak. And I really dream for a multi-sensory future, because if we depend on all of our senses, not only smell, all of our senses, then we will have a better every day. We can, as individuals, as human beings, we will enjoy life in a better way, and we will be able to know more, not only through sight and sound, but also other senses, smell, taste, touch. And regarding your question, how can people reach? You can give, if anyone is interested, you can give my email ID. I will respond. I will be glad to respond. Anyone is welcome in the sensory studies. We can be comrades and work together. And through your channel, they can, through my academia profile or LinkedIn profiles, they can also get me there as well.
Yes, and I will be happy to share. Going back to this last point that you touched on, I think is probably the most important summary point when it comes to any discussion on the senses. The senses really contribute to our self-awareness. And it's not only to help us learn more about ourselves, of who we are and what we're trying to do, but also should help us communicate better with others. So self-awareness is actually the central point in any interaction with the world, not only with people, but with everything around us. And I really hope that technology will move in a direction where it will help humans get a better understanding of who they are, of this self-awareness, and through this really engage in better ways, more peaceful ways with the world around. Thank you, Sayantan. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Ruxana. It's my pleasure. I can't thank you more. Hope to talk with you in the future again.
Yes, we'll keep in touch.